The name alone made grown men nervous. It was 1943. American bombers were falling from the sky. 60 aircraft. Gone. In a single day, 1,500 crew members vanished. In a single week. The Nazis believed they had already won the air war, and they were right, until one machine changed everything. A fighter so deadly, so precise, so perfectly built, that even Hitler's own air chief looked up at the sky over Berlin and quietly said, "It's over." But how did one airplane decide the fate of an entire war? Stay with us, because what comes next will change how you see everything. Welcome to Wings of WW2, where the greatest air battles in human history come alive, one story at a time. Now, before we go any further, a humble request. If this is your first time here, please find that little subscribe button. It should be somewhere nearby. Think of it this way, subscribing takes about 2 seconds. The veterans who flew these missions had far less time than that to make decisions that saved thousands of lives. So, go ahead. It costs nothing, and it means everything to this channel. Also, the team here would love to know where in the world are you watching from today. Drop your city or country in the comments below. Whether you are watching from London, Lahore, New York, or Nairobi, you are part of this community now. It was the summer of 1943, and the United States Army Air Forces believed they had a winning strategy. Their plan was bold, ambitious, and as history would brutally prove, dangerously incomplete. The Americans had deployed their most powerful bombers, the B-17, Flying Fortress, and the B-2 for Liberator, on massive daylight raids, deep into the heart of Nazi Germany. The targets were clear: destroy German factories, cripple their war production, and bring the Nazi war machine to its knees. On paper, the strategy looked sound. In the skies over Germany, it was becoming a catastrophe. The Americans had assumed that their bombers, heavily armed, flying in tight defensive formations, could protect themselves. They were wrong. The Luftwaffe, Germany's air force, was waiting for them. Experienced, disciplined, and flying highly capable fighters. German pilots tore through American bomber formations with devastating precision. On a single day, August 17, 1943, 60 American aircraft were destroyed during raids on Schweinfurt and Regensburg. Each aircraft carried a crew of 10 men. The mathematics of that loss were almost impossible to absorb. Then came October 1943. In a single week, 148 bombers failed to return. 1,500 crew members gone. The bombing campaign, which was supposed to end the war faster, was instead bleeding the Allied forces dry. The core problem was not courage. American airmen had courage in extraordinary supply. The problem was range. The fighter escorts assigned to protect the bombers, primarily the P-47 Thunderbolt, were powerful machines, but they consumed fuel at a ferocious rate. They could escort bombers only as far as 300 miles from base. Berlin was 550 miles away. Every time the Thunderbolts turned back, the Luftwaffe moved in. The gap in range was not just a technical problem. It was a strategic crisis, and it was costing lives by the thousands. Here is a question that serious strategists must ask themselves. What happens when a powerful tool already exists, but nobody is using it correctly? This was exactly the situation in 1942. The P-51 Mustang was already flying. It had been in service since 1940. The British Royal Air Force had ordered 620 of them. American engineers had built it in just 117 days, a remarkable achievement by any standard. And yet, the Mustang was considered a second-tier aircraft, not because it lacked speed. At low altitude, it was faster than the British Spitfire, and it carried twice the fuel, giving it twice the range. Those were extraordinary numbers. The problem was altitude. The moment the Mustang climbed above 15,000 feet, its Allison's engine began to suffocate. It lost power. It slowed down. It became vulnerable. And in the air war over Germany, combat happened between 20,000 and 25,000 feet. A fast, long-range fighter that could not perform at altitude was strategically useless. So the Mustang sat on the sidelines, waiting. Then a small team of Rolls-Royce engineers made a decision that would quietly rewrite the outcome of World War II. They removed the Allison engine and replaced it with the Rolls-Royce Merlin, the same engine that powered the legendary British Spitfire. The transformation was immediate, dramatic, almost unbelievable. The Merlin engine delivered more power at 25,000 feet than the Allison had ever produced at ground level, and it achieved this remarkable performance on half the fuel consumed by the P-47 Thunderbolt's engine. Suddenly, the Mustang was no longer a second-tier aircraft. It was a thoroughbred. Long range confirmed. High altitude performance confirmed. speed, firepower, and handling, all confirmed. The Americans and British placed large orders immediately. The American-built Packard Merlin became the standard engine for all future Mustang production. But here is the deeper lesson that business strategists must absorb carefully. The Mustang did not succeed because someone invented something entirely new. It succeeded because two nations' competitors in many respects set aside rivalry, shared their strongest assets, and combined British engineering brilliance with American industrial scale. The airframe already existed. The engine already existed. The breakthrough came from the willingness to combine them. In boardrooms and business strategies, this lesson is timeless. The asset that appears to be failing may simply have the wrong engine driving it. Change the engine, and everything changes. History does not remember blueprints. It remembers results. And in May 1944, the world was about to see what happens when the right weapon finally reaches the right hands at the right moment. The upgraded P-51 Mustang entered operational service with one defining mission: escort American bombers all the way to Berlin and bring them safely home. No fighter had ever done this before. Not the Thunderbolt, not the Spitfire, not anything the Allies had fielded in 4 years of brutal air war. But execution is never simply about having a superior tool. History is filled with superior tools that failed because the human element was missing. The Mustang's deployment succeeded because 3 critical factors aligned simultaneously, and strategists must study each one carefully. The first factor was preparation. Young American pilots arriving in Britain were inexperienced. Many had never seen real combat. Their first encounters with battle-hardened Luftwaffe veterans were deeply humbling. Some were terrified. Some became physically ill. But they were trained aggressively, mentored by experienced leaders, and given time to convert fear into competence. They were not thrown into battle and forgotten. They were developed deliberately. The second factor was leadership. Commanders like Colonel Dome Blakesley understood that aggression, disciplined, calculated aggression, was the only viable strategy. There was no room for defensive thinking at 30,000 feet. Every Mustang pilot was trained to attack, regardless of the odds. When German fighters appeared, the response was immediate and total. Drop the external fuel tanks. Engage. Always engage. This philosophy produced results that changed the entire momentum of the air war. The third factor was scale. Individual heroism wins moments. Scale wins wars. On a single mission day, 1,000 bombers filled the sky, escorted by 700 fighters, 10,700 men, airborne simultaneously, advancing into the most heavily defended airspace in human history. The Luftwaffe had never faced anything like it. German fighter pilots had learned to exploit the limited range of the Thunderbolt, circling patiently at the edge of its operational radius, waiting for the escorts to turn back. It was a reliable tactic. It had worked for months. The Mustang made that tactic obsolete overnight. Now, when German pilots circled and waited, the Mustang was still there, still climbing, still engaging, still dangerous all the way to Berlin and all the way back. The psychological impact on Luftwaffe pilots was profound. The operational impact was devastating. And here lies the business lesson that separates organizations that survive from those that collapse. Superior strategy, delivered at insufficient scale, produces insufficient results. The Mustang was not deployed in small numbers as an experiment. It was deployed with the full industrial weight of the United States behind it. Thousands of aircraft, thousands of trained pilots, thousands of dedicated ground crew, maintaining each machine as though their own lives depended on it. Because they did. Execution at scale, backed by preparation and leadership. That is not just how wars are won. That is how industries are conquered. There is a moment in every conflict, every market, every industry, when the losing side stops fighting to win and starts fighting simply to survive. For Nazi Germany, that moment arrived not with a single dramatic battle. It arrived quietly, systematically, and with absolute finality, written in contrails across the skies over Berlin. By early 1945, the once mighty Luftwaffe was unrecognizable. The organization that had terrorized European skies since 1939, that had decimated Allied bomber formations with ruthless precision, was now scraping the bottom of its own barrel. Fuel reserves were critically depleted. Spare parts had become almost impossible to source. Experienced pilots, the backbone of any air fighting force, were gone, replaced by young, undertrained recruits who were being sent into combat against the most capable fighter pilots in the world. The results were not battles, they were eliminations. On January 14, 1945, Mustang pilots recorded 161 confirmed kills in a single day. The numbers were so overwhelming they barely seemed real. On April 16, more than 700 German aircraft were destroyed, the majority of them never even leaving the ground. 80 aircraft were eliminated in a single attack on one airfield alone. This was no longer air combat in any traditional sense. This was the systematic dismantling of an entire military institution. And the man who understood this, better than anyone, was not an Allied general. It was Hermann Göring, Commander-in-Chief of the Luftwaffe itself. When American captors asked Göring the precise moment he knew Germany had lost the air war, his answer required no lengthy explanation, no complex military analysis. He said simply, "When I saw the Mustangs over Berlin, I knew the jig was up." For words from the man who built the Luftwaffe from nothing, who had watched it dominate European skies for years, who had genuinely believed, that no Allied fighter could ever reach Berlin. For words that confirmed what the numbers already showed, sustained strategic superiority, had produced irreversible consequences. But the Mustang's impact extended far beyond aerial victories. As Allied fighters achieved complete dominance of the skies, German ground forces lost their protective cover entirely. Supply lines were systematically destroyed. Factories that had once powered the Nazi war machine were reduced to rubble. The economic infrastructure of an entire nation, carefully constructed over years, was methodically dismantled from 30,000 feet. This is the final and most important lesson for every strategist, entrepreneur, and business leader who has followed this story carefully. Göring did not surrender when Germany lost a single battle. He did not panic when the Luftwaffe lost a single squadron. The breaking point arrived when he looked up at the sky over his own capital city, and saw that the enemy had achieved something his organization could no longer match, could no longer counter, and could no longer survive. Sustained dominance, not occasional victory, is what breaks competitors permanently. One strong quarter does not define a business. One successful product does not secure an industry. True strategic victory arrives when an organization builds such overwhelming, consistent, and compounding superiority that competitors stop calculating how to win and begin calculating only how much longer they can last. The P-51 Mustang did not win a battle. It won a war of attrition, fought at altitude, at scale, and with relentless precision, until the enemy had nothing left to offer but surrender. That is the standard, not victory. Dominance.